The entire story of mercenaries in the 100 Years' War, hired to kill the 100 Years' War, is usually remembered as a clash of crowns, England and France locked in a long, bitter struggle for land, legitimacy, and survival. Yet beneath the banners of kings and the rhetoric of chivalry moved a darker, more flexible force. These were the mercenaries, soldiers without homeland loyalty, hired for coin, bound only by contract, and feared as much by civilians as by enemy armies. They were not an accessory to the war, they were one of its engines. In the 14th and 15th centuries, warfare was expensive, seasonal, and brutally inefficient. Feudal levies could not be kept in the field year-round, and noble retinues were too small for sustained campaigns. Kings needed men who could fight whenever required, who demanded pay instead of privilege, and who had no expectation of honour beyond survival. Mercenaries filled that gap. They came from everywhere: Gascony, Brittany, Flanders, Lombardy, Germany, Spain, and they fought for whoever could meet their price. Many of these men were veterans of earlier campaigns, hardened by siege warfare and raids. Others were dispossessed peasants, younger sons of minor nobles, or criminals seeking protection under arms. What united them was experience. Mercenaries knew how to march fast, forage aggressively, storm towns, and hold ground. They were practical fighters, in an age still pretending war was a noble art. The most infamous among them were the free companies, also known as routiers. These bands emerged whenever truces interrupted the war. When kings stopped paying, mercenaries did not go home. They stayed together, armed, organised and desperate. France, especially after the Black Death, became their hunting ground. Free companies seized castles, extorted towns, kidnapped nobles for ransom, and stripped entire regions bare. Contemporary chronicles describe villages emptied overnight, fields abandoned, and churches fortified like bunkers. For civilians, mercenaries were indistinguishable from invaders. They spoke foreign languages, wore mismatched armour, and obeyed captains whose authority came from fear. Yet kings continued to employ them. Why? Because mercenaries worked. They filled ranks quickly, brought specialised skills, crossbowmen, engineers, pikemen, and could be dismissed when politically inconvenient. In a war that stretched across generations, flexibility mattered more than loyalty. English commanders relied heavily on paid troops. Even their famous longbowmen were often contracted professionals rather than feudal levies. French armies, despite their noble cavalry tradition, increasingly turned to mercenaries after repeated disasters. The defeats of Crécy and Poitiers exposed the limits of aristocratic warfare. Survival required adaptation, and mercenaries represented that adaptation in its rawest form. Mercenary captains became powerful figures. Some negotiated directly with kings, playing rivals against each other. Others carved out semi-independent territories. Bertrand du Guesclin, before becoming France's constable, learned to command mixed forces of professionals and irregulars. In Italy, similar men would later dominate politics, but in France, their influence remained dangerous and unstable. A mercenary leader could save a province or ruin it. Payment was the constant problem. Coin shortages, delayed wages, and broken promises were common. When pay stopped, violence followed. Mercenaries compensated themselves by force. This reality blurred the line between war and banditry. A soldier hired to defend a region 1 month might pillage it the next. Chroniclers often describe this as moral collapse, but it was also economic logic in a world with no safety net. Attempts were made to control them. Kings offered mass pardons, organised campaigns to drive free companies out, or redirected them toward foreign wars. One notorious solution was to send them to fight in Castile or Italy, exporting violence elsewhere. Sometimes it worked. Often it merely delayed the inevitable return of armed men, looking for pay. By the 15th century, the mercenary problem forced structural change. France, exhausted by decades of chaos, began to build a standing army. Charles VII's reforms created permanent paid companies under royal control, reducing reliance on independent bands. Mercenaries did not disappear, but they were absorbed, regulated, or pushed to the margins. The age of wandering free companies slowly ended, yet their legacy endured. Mercenaries reshaped how war was fought. They normalized professional soldiery, constant readiness, and strategic brutality. They taught rulers that loyalty could be bought, but also that it could vanish the moment the money ran out. The 100 Years' War was not only a struggle between nations, it was a proving ground for modern warfare, and mercenaries stood at its centre. They were hired to kill, but they also changed history. In their wake lay ruined villages, broken feudal ideals, and the foundations of the modern state. Kings learned a hard lesson. Once violence becomes a profession, it can no longer be switched off at will. Close your eyes. Let the modern world dissolve into the grey mist of memory. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your city and local time in the comments so we can see where everyone is listening from. Now, imagine the scent of damp wool and old parchment, the scratch of a quill pen echoing louder than a sword strike. We are standing at the edge of a precipice in the year of our Lord 1337. Though the people here do not yet know, they are stepping into a century of fire. The air is heavy with the smell of rain on iron. We are in a drafty administrative chamber in Westminster, or perhaps a tent in Flanders, where the true machinery of war is being assembled, not with oaths of fealty, but with contracts. This is the twilight of the feudal ideal. For centuries, the deal was simple. A lord gave a knight land, and in return, the knight gave the lord 40 days of fighting service a year. It was a system built on honour, land, and a very convenient time limit. But 40 days is barely enough time to march to the border, let alone conquer France. King Edward III of England, young and ambitious, stares at a map and realises a hard truth. Glory is wonderful, but it does not pay for logistics, and feudal obligation does not keep an army in the field through the winter harvest. To claim the French crown, he needs men who will stay until the job is done. He needs professionals. And so, the indenture of war begins to replace the feudal summons. Picture a small, jagged piece of vellum cut in a zigzag pattern, a chirograph, one half for the king, one half for the captain. If the jagged edges match, the deal is real. These documents are revolutionary. They stipulate everything. The wages for a man-at-arms, the compensation for a lost horse, the division of ransom money. It is the commodification of courage. Historians still argue whether this shift to bastard feudalism, as the Victorians dramatically called it, marked the moral decline of the nobility, or simply the sensible modernisation of the state. Regardless of the ethics, the effect is immediate. A captain, who might be a great earl or a rough-edged veteran, agrees to bring a specific number of archers and men-at-arms for a specific price. The coin flows, and suddenly the army is no longer a gathering of neighbours bound by duty. It is a company of employees bound by silver. It's a bit like hiring a contractor to fix your roof, except the roof is France, and the tools are pikes and longbows. And just like home repairs, it always ends up costing more than the original estimate. We see the first ripples of this change in the way men look at each other. The knight in shining plate is still there, yes, but standing next to him is a man who is there simply because it pays better than farming turnips in the mud of Essex. The social hierarchy is beginning to blur around the edges, softened by the universal language of gold. This is the moment the war shifts from a personal quarrel between cousins into a professional enterprise. The ink is drying on the vellum. The coins are counted into leather pouches with a heavy, satisfying clatter. The mercenaries are not yet the scourges of the countryside they will become. For now, they are just men with a job to do. But the precedent has been set. The king has opened the door to a force he can hire, but eventually will struggle to control. The wind picks up outside the tent, rattling the canvas, whispering of the long, bloody road ahead. The first contract is signed. The war for pay has begun. The ink on the parchment is dry, but a contract is merely a promise until it is fleshed out with bone and blood. And so we move from the quiet chambers of negotiation to the chaotic, mud-splattered reality of the muster fields where the business of war truly begins. Imagine the sound first, a low, rhythmic thrumming of thousands of feet stamping on the earth, the clatter of wood against shield, and the sharp, metallic ring of hammers on anvils, repairing the inevitable rust of a damp English spring. We are witnessing the birth of a new kind of army, one not gathered solely by the ancient obligation of a tenant to his lord, but by the magnetism of the shilling. In the villages of Cheshire, the mountains of Wales, and the bustling ports of the Cinque Ports, the call has gone out, not for heroes, but for men who can follow orders and loose an arrow with terrified precision. The bureaucracy of enlistment is surprisingly sophisticated, a paper trail that follows the soldier from his village green to the muddy fields of France. Royal commissioners, often tired men with ink-stained fingers and sharp eyes, sit at rickety tables set up in market squares, scrutinising the recruits who shuffle forward. This is the Commission of Array, a system designed to pluck the most able-bodied men from the population, though able-bodied is a term often interpreted loosely depending on how desperate the king is for bodies. A young ploughman steps up, his hands calloused from the hoe, and in a matter of moments he is transformed. He is no longer defined by the harvest he plants, but by the weapon he carries. If he has a bow, he is an archer. If he has a dagger and a sturdy demeanour, he is a spearman. He is given a coat and conduct allowance, a small sum to get him to the port of embarkation, and suddenly the world, which once ended at the tree line of his parish, expands to encompass the sea and the burning lands beyond. It is a terrifying liberation. For many, this enlistment is an escape. The mid-14th century is a hard time to be poor and honest. The law is harsh, debts are crushing, and the feudal ceiling is low and made of stone. But here at the muster, a man might find a loophole. The king offers letters of protection to those who sign up, essentially a royal pause button on lawsuits and debts. Even more enticing are the charters of pardon. A man who has poached a deer in the king's forest, or perhaps settled a tavern argument with a fatal swing of a tankard, can wipe his slate clean by trading his life for the king's service. It is a grim sword of redemption. Wash away a murder at home by committing a dozen more abroad. Historians have long debated the quality of these troops, questioning whether an army of debtors and pardoned criminals could truly be disciplined. Yet the records show that these men, desperate to keep their freedom, often fought with a ferocity that well-fed knights could rarely match. They had nowhere else to go. The logistics of equipping them are staggering. The crown cannot rely on every man bringing his own gear. A peasant's tunic offers poor protection against a French crossbow bolt. And so, we see the rise of mass production. Warehouses in the Tower of London are filled with sheaves of arrows, thousands of bow staves imported from the Baltic, and crates of jacks, thick, padded jackets filled with tow or rags that can stop a glancing blow. It is the industrialization of violence. Standing in line, a recruit receives his kit. It is likely ill-fitting, smelling of the previous owner's sweat, or perhaps damp from storage. Yet it is the most valuable clothing he has ever touched. He is given a steel cap, perhaps a kettle hat with a broad brim that makes him look like an inverted soup pot, but which will save him from the lethal rain of debris in a siege. He tests the weight of it, feeling the cold iron settle on his brow, a heavy reminder of his new trade. The captain of his company, a man who is contracted with the king to bring 100 such men, walks the lines, checking the muster rolls. These rolls are crucial. They are the spreadsheets of the Middle Ages, listing every John, Thomas, and William, their rank and their daily rate. A mounted archer might earn 6pence a day, a fortune compared to the penny or two of a labourer. A man-at-arms might earn a shilling. The promise of regular silver is a powerful drug. It whispers of a life where one might not just survive, but prosper. Of course, the irony, and there is always a dark irony in war, is that the soldiers often have to spend their first wages buying their own food from the very merchants following the army. A closed economic loop that keeps them hungry and marching. The humour in the camps is dark and dry, usually revolving on the likelihood of the pay chest actually arriving or the questionable origins of the salt pork. The king's shilling is heavy, they might joke, but the bread is heavier. As the companies form, distinct identities begin to emerge. They are not wearing uniforms in the modern sense, but they don specific badges or colours to distinguish friend from foe in the heat of the melee. The Cross of Saint. George begins to appear on surcoats, a unifying symbol stitched over a chaotic mix of personal armour. It is a visual assertion that they are part of a single terrifying entity. The atmosphere is thick with a mixture of bravado and dread. Men sharpen daggers on whetstones, the rasping sound filling the air like the buzzing of angry hornets. They test the tension of bass strings, listening for that sharp thwip that signals a lethal cast. They pack their meagre belongings, a wooden spoon, a spare pair of hose, perhaps a lucky charm made of bone or a stolen ribbon from a sweetheart. The emotional weight of this moment is heavy. Most of these men have never seen the sea. They are leaving the only world they know to cross a grey, heaving channel to a land they have been told is full of enemies. The transition is complete. The ploughshare has been beaten into a sword, not metaphorically, but in the soul of the man holding it. He has signed the contract or made his mark. He has taken the coin. He is no longer a man of the soil. He is a man of the road, a hireling, a soldier. The ships are waiting at Portsmouth and Southampton, their masts like a stripped forest against the grey sky. The horses are being loaded, terrified and plunging as they are winched aboard, their hooves clattering on the wooden ramps. The smell of tar, brine and horse manure is overwhelming. The great machine is moving. The coin has been counted, the ink is dry, and the cold iron is sharp. They are ready to be exported to the fields of France, a commodity of violence shipped across the narrow sea. As the coast of England fades into the mist behind them, the reality settles in. The contract has no expiration date other than victory or death. The bureaucracy has done its job. Now the butchers must do theirs. The ships have landed, the boots have marched, and now the air of northern France hangs heavy and humid, charged with the static of an approaching storm that mirrors the violence about to unfold. We find ourselves on a sloping ridge near the forest of Crécy-en-Ponthieu. The date is late August, 1346. It is late in the afternoon, the time when shadows usually lengthen into gentle evening. But today, the darkness comes from above. Thunder grumbles like a shifting tectonic plate, and the sky is bruised purple and black. Below the ridge, the vast glittering host of France is arriving, a chaotic river of steel, silk, and arrogance. King Philip VI, has brought the flower of chivalry to crush the English invaders, who are outnumbered, cornered, and seemingly doomed. But look closely at the men standing on the ridge. They are not trembling peasants with pitchforks. They are the men we saw at the muster, the contract soldiers, the professionals. They are sitting, waiting, their valuable bow staves protected in canvas cases to keep them dry. This is the first great test of the new military economy. On the French side, however, we see a different kind of mercenary, and their story is one of the most tragic of the war. Marching at the front of the French line are the Genoese crossbowmen, 6,000 of them by some accounts. They are arguably the best professional infantry in Europe, hired for their lethal precision and their heavy mechanical bows that can punch through mail. But today they are tired. They have marched miles with heavy gear, their large defensive shields, parvises, left behind in the baggage train miles to the rear. They are exposed, exhausted and hungry. As the heavens open and rain lashes the field, the Genoese try to shield their weapons, but water soaks into the hemp strings of their crossbows, slackening them, robbing them of power. The English archers on the ridge merely uncase their bows after the rain stops. The sun bursts through the clouds, setting directly in the eyes of the Genoese, blinding them with a golden glare. It is a cosmic bad joke. Wet strings, no shields, and the sun in their eyes. Yet they are professionals. They advance. They give a great shout to frighten the English, a tactic that has worked in Italy battles. The English do not move. They shout again. Silence from the ridge. A third shout, and they loose their bolts. But the damp strings fail them. The bolts fall short, thudding harmlessly into the mud. From the ridge, the response is a sound that will haunt the nightmares of French nobility for a century. It is not a shout, but a synchronized, mechanical snap. The English longbowmen step forward. These men are earning their daily wage with a physicality that historians often struggle to convey. Drawing a warbow requires over 100 pounds of force, a feat that warps the skeleton, as archaeologists have found in the thickened bones of archers' shoulders. It is a weapon of the strong, not the weak. They draw. They loose. The chronicler Jean Froissart wrote that the arrows fell like snow, a poetic description for a blizzard of razor-sharp iron. It is not a volley. It is a continuous stream, a machine gun tempo in a world of single-shot weapons. The Genoese are annihilated. Panicked, they turn to retreat, but their contract has just been terminated in the most brutal fashion imaginable. King Philip, seeing his hired men fleeing, does not see a tactical withdrawal. He sees treason. "Kill me, these rascals," he commands, "for they block our path and are useless." The French knights, the paragons of chivalry, lower their lances and charge, not at the English, but into the backs of their own mercenaries. It is a slaughter of employees by their employers, a grim reminder that, in the feudal mindset, a mercenary is a tool to be broken when it no longer functions. The Genoese die between the English arrows and the French hooves, crushed in a vice of class contempt and steel. Then the knights continue up the slope, convinced that their heavy armour and noble blood render them invincible. They are wrong. The longbow has changed the physics of the battlefield. Modern ballistics experts still argue fiercely about whether a bodkin point could truly pierce high-quality plate armour directly, or if the devastation was caused by maddened horses, unarmoured and pinned like pincushions, throwing their riders into the sucking mud. The result, however, is the same. The charge stalls, men fall. The English men-at-arms, dismounted and standing shoulder to shoulder with the archers, step forward to finish the work with short swords and hammers. It is efficient, industrial killing. There is no ransom taking here, not today. The red flag, the oriflamme, was raised by the French, signalling no quarter, and the English are returning the favour with cold professionalism. Wave after wave of French nobility charges, driven by a code of honour that demands bravery but lacks common sense. They are piled in heaps, a gruesome rampart of dead men and horses that grows higher as the sun sets. The blind King John of Bohemia, a guest of the French, asks to be led into the fighting so he might strike one blow. His knights tie their horses to his and lead him into the dark churn. They are all found the next day, dead, their horses still tethered together, a monument to a dying age of romantic folly. When night finally falls, the silence is heavier than the storm. The English light torches and wander the field, not to gloat, but to count. The flower of France lies in the mud. The longbowmen, the paid men with their calloused hands and yew-staves, have destroyed the finest cavalry in Christendom. They clean their arrows, retrieve what can be salvaged, and tally their kills. There is a sense of shock, even among the victors. The hierarchy of the world has been inverted. A yeoman archer, earning pennies, has slain a duke worth a kingdom. The Battle of Crécy is over, but the message echoes across Europe. The mounted knight is no longer the undisputed master of war. The era of the projectile, of the disciplined paid infantryman, has truly arrived. For the mercenaries of Europe, this is both a warning and an opportunity. The Genoese bodies in the mud serve as a grim caution against trusting princes, but the English success proves that a well-paid, well-equipped professional force is the future. As the English army settles into sleep, the adrenaline fading into exhaustion, the air is thick with the copper smell of blood and the smoke of campfires. They have survived, they have earned their pay. But the war is far from over. In fact, for the common people of France, the true horror is just beginning. For an army that knows it can win is an army that will want to take more than just victory on a battlefield. They will want the spoils of the land itself. The archers rest their aching muscles, rubbing tallow into their bows, unaware that they have just shot a hole through the heart of the Middle Ages. The night is cool now. The storm passed, but in the distance, the fires of the chevauchée are already being kindled in the minds of the commanders. The raid is next. The arrows of Crécy have been gathered, the dead buried in shallow, unmarked graves, and the war has shifted shape again, morphing from a desperate stand into a rolling, smoking catastrophe known as the chevauchée. Close your eyes and breathe in. The air is no longer crisp with rain, but thick, acrid, and choking. It smells of burning thatch, of scorched vines, and of ancient timbers turning to ash. We are now in the mid-1350s, and the English have unleashed a strategy that is less about conquest and more about economic amputation. Leading this campaign of calculated ruin is a figure who stalks the corridors of history with a reputation as dark as the armour he supposedly wore. Edward of Woodstock, the Prince of Wales. To the Victorians he was the Black Prince, a title that drips with Gothic romance, though historians gently remind us that he was never called that in his lifetime. To his contemporaries, he was simply the Prince, a man who understood that a king's power relies on his tax base, and if you burn the tax base, you break the king. This is the golden age for the mercenary. The chevauchée, literally a horse charge or promenade, is a raid on a massive industrial scale. The army moves not in a tight column, but spreads out across a front miles wide, a sweeping broom of destruction designed to catch everything in its bristles. For the professional soldier, this is the work they dream of. It is low risk, high reward warfare. There are no shield walls to break, no desperate uphill charges against knights. There is only the open, undefended belly of France. The region of Languedoc, lush and wealthy, has not seen war for generations. It is a land of fat sheep, overflowing granaries, and unguarded wine cellars. To the mercenaries riding with the prince, Gascon light cavalry, English archers, and hardened adventurers from the free companies, it looks less like a military campaign and more like a vast, undefended shopping mall where the currency is violence. Watch them as they ride. They are terrifyingly efficient. A village is spotted in the distance, nestled in a valley. The captain gives a signal, often just a wave of a gauntleted hand, and the company splits. One group rides to the flanks to catch runaways. The others ride straight down the main street. Torches are lit from saddlebow lanterns. The goal is not to hold the town, but to gut it. They take what can be carried, silver chalices from the church, coin hidden in mattresses, livestock that can be driven, and burn the rest. The logic is brutal. A peasant with no house and no harvest cannot pay taxes to the King of France. If King John II cannot protect his people, his legitimacy crumbles. It is psychological warfare written in fire. The mercenaries are the arsonists, and they are paid twice. Once by the prince, and again by the plunder they strap to their saddles. The sheer volume of loot is staggering. Chronicles tell of soldiers discarding silver because they found gold, and discarding gold because they found jewels. It is a frantic, gluttonous sort of looting. The baggage train swells, slowing the army down, a serpentine beast gorged on the wealth of the south. There is a dark absurdity to it. Imagine a rough-faced archer, a man who grew up sleeping on straw in a damp English hovel, now struggling to tie a bundle of silk tapestries to a stolen mule, debating whether a second feather bed is worth the extra weight. It is the redistribution of wealth at the point of a sword. But under the dark comedy of soldiers struggling with heavy packs lies a profound tragedy. The Jacques, the common nickname for the French peasant, watches his life's work vanish in an afternoon. The smoke from the burning villages is said to be so thick it blots out the sun. A man-made eclipse that tracks the army's progress across the map. The prince rides at the centre of this storm, cool and detached. He is writing letters home to his father, cataloguing the destruction with the dry precision of an accountant. We have burnt, destroyed, and pillaged all the lands of the Count of Armagnac, he writes, as if confirming a shipment of wool. For him, this is politics. For the mercenaries, it is a job. But for the people of France, it is the apocalypse. The refugees clog the roads, a miserable tide of humanity fleeing the English army, though in truth, the army is a polyglot mix of Gascons, Welshmen, and foreign specialists. The distinction matters little to the farmer whose barn is burning, yet amidst the flames, the discipline of these paid men is surprisingly tight. This is not a riot, it is a machine. The prince enforces strict orders, no straggling, no fighting over spoils that delays the march. When they reach a major city like Narbonne, they strike hard, burning the suburbs where the trade happens, but often bypassing the heavily fortified citadels. They are not here to die in sieges, they are here to humiliate. The mercenaries respect this pragmatism. They are professionals, after all. They know that a dead man spends no gold. They move with a wolf-like rhythm. Stalk, strike, eat, move. The Grand Chevauché of 1355 becomes legendary, not for battles won, but for the sheer mileage of ruin. They ride from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean and back, a loop of devastation that leaves a scar across the face of France. But every party has a curfew. As the wagons groan under the weight of plunder and the army turns north, the strategic winds begin to shift. The French are not just watching anymore, they are mobilizing. King John II, stung by the humiliation, has gathered a massive army to intercept the raiders. The mercenaries, their senses sharpened by years of living on the edge, feel the change in the air. The easy days of burning undefended hamlets are ending. The scouts report dust clouds on the horizon. Big ones. The hunters are about to become the hunted. The prince knows he is overextended. The baggage train is too heavy, the men are tired, and the water is running low. They move north, seeking a crossing over the Loire, but the bridges are broken or guarded. The French are herding them, pushing them into a corner. The mercenaries check their gear with renewed urgency. The silk tapestries are packed away. The swords are loosened in their scabbards. The gluttony of the raid is replaced by the cold anxiety of the trap. They know the geography of bad situations, and this one has all the signs: a slow-moving army, a fast-moving enemy, and hostile terrain. The laughter in the camp dies down. The gambling over dice stops. We are approaching the fields near Poitiers. It is September 1356. The summer is dying, and the leaves are turning the colour of rusted iron. The Black Prince, weighed down by the spoils of a kingdom, can run no further. He must turn and face the avalanche he has provoked. The mercenaries, who have spent months terrorising civilians, must now earn their pay against the finest heavy cavalry in Europe. They are rich men now, some of them carrying fortunes in their saddlebags. But a fortune is a heavy thing to carry when you are running for your life. The fires of the chevauchée have burned themselves out, leaving only smoke and the hard reality of steel. The raid is over. The battle is about to begin. The prince chooses his ground carefully, hiding his small force among hedges and vineyards, turning the terrain into a fortress. He knows, and his mercenaries know, that they cannot win a fair fight. So, they prepare to fight an unfair one. The sun sets on a silent army, waiting for the dawn and the thunder of hooves. The sun rises over the fields of Maupertuis, near Poitiers, revealing a scene that looks less like a battlefield and more like a dense, thorny labyrinth. The Black Prince, outnumbered perhaps 2 to 1, has once again turned geography into a weapon. He has placed his men among the hedges, vines and marshes, forcing the French to squeeze their massive numbers through narrow choke points. It is a landscape designed to strip away the advantages of heavy cavalry and aristocratic pride. The air is cool, the ground soft from the damp autumn, and the smell of crushed grapes mingles with the metallic tang of sharpened steel. In the quiet before the storm, a surreal interlude occurs. A cardinal, Talleyrand of Périgord, rides back and forth between the lines. His red robes, a stark contrast to the grey armour, desperate to broker a truce. For a day, the war pauses. The English, low on food and water, are actually willing to deal. They offer to return the loot, the prisoners, and promise not to fight for 7 years. It is a mercenary's pragmatic offer. Keep the profit, avoid the risk. But the French king, John II, confident in his overwhelming strength, demands unconditional surrender. He wants the prince in chains. The negotiations fail. The cardinal rides away weeping, and the machinery of death grinds back into motion. The battle that follows is a chaotic, suffocating struggle in the mud. The French have learned one lesson from Crécy: horses are vulnerable. So, the elite knights dismount, cutting their lances down to 5 feet to use as spears, trudging forward on foot in their heavy plate. It is a slow, clanking tide of iron. But they have forgotten the other lesson. Terrain matters. As they push into the hedges, they are funneled into kill zones. The English longbowmen, positioned safely behind the briars, open fire. But here, the arrows are less effective against the improved plate armour of the French nobility. The arrows glance off the curved steel. Seeing this, the archers abandon the centre of the chest and aim for the exposed bits, the visors, the armpits, the legs. When the arrows run dry, the archers drop their bows and rush in with knives and hammers. It is a brawl, ugly and intimate. In the midst of this grinding deadlock, a figure emerges who embodies the mercenary spirit perfectly, the Captal de Buch. He is a Gascon lord, technically a vassal, but in practice a professional commander who fights for the English crown because it pays and protects his interests. Seeing the stalemate, he takes a small force of mounted men, Gascons, archers, and opportunists, and swings wide around a hill, hidden by the terrain. It is a classic ambush. He strikes the French rear just as their reserves are hesitating. Panic, that most contagious of battlefield diseases, ripples through the French lines. The batailles, divisions, crumble. The dukes take flight, prioritizing the safety of their retinues over the safety of their king. And there, in the centre of the collapsing army, stands King John II. He is a tragic figure, wielding a great battle axe, fighting with a ferocity that surprises everyone. Alongside him is his 14-year-old son, Philip, who shouts warnings to his father in the melee. "Father, guard to the right. Father, guard to the left." It is a moment of pure, heartbreaking humanity amidst the slaughter. But the men surrounding the king are not moved by the pathos. They are motivated by the payout. They see the golden lilies on his surcoat and see the ultimate lottery ticket. The capture of King John is perhaps the most defining mercenary moment of the century. It is not a polite surrender. It is a mob scene. Dozens of men, English, Gascon, even French exiles fighting for the prince, swarm the king, grabbing at his armour, shouting, "I took him, and yield to me." They are literally tearing at the monarch, nearly killing the prize in their greed to claim it. The man who finally secures him is Denis de Montbec, a French knight exiled for manslaughter, now fighting for English pay. He pushes through the crowd, demanding the king's gauntlet. The king, exhausted and battered, hands it over, reportedly asking to be led to the prince. The symbolism is shattering. The anointed King of France, the lieutenant of God on earth, has been tackled and claimed by a banished criminal working for a paycheck. The aftermath of Poitiers is a study in cognitive dissonance. That evening, in the prince's red silk pavilion, a banquet is held. The Black Prince, ever the performer of chivalry, waits on the captive King John at the table, serving him food and praising his valour. "You have outshone all your knights," the prince murmurs, bowing low. It is a beautiful scene, straight out of an Arthurian romance. But outside the tent, the reality is starkly transactional. The English and Gascon soldiers are stripping the French dead with efficient brutality. They are piling up mountains of armour, counting horses and haggling over the ransoms of lesser nobles. The capture of the king effectively ends the fighting, not because the war is won, but because the English have secured the most valuable asset in Christendom. The ransom set for King John is astronomical, 3 million gold écus. To put that in perspective, it is roughly equal to the entire economic output of France for 2 years. It is a sum so large it is almost theoretical. And this is where the mercenary nature of the war fundamentally breaks the feudal contract. A king is no longer just a leader, he is a commodity. The war has become a kidnapping operation on a state scale. For the soldiers, Poitiers is the jackpot. Archers who left England with nothing are now wealthy men. They sell their prisoners to their captains, who sell them to the prince, who holds them for the crown. It is a trickle-up economy of human trafficking. The camps are loud with drunken celebration. Men are gambling with gold spurs and drinking wine from silver helmets. But beneath the revelry, a dangerous precedent is set. These men have seen that the King of France can be beaten, captured, and sold. The aura of invincibility that surrounds royalty has been pierced. If a king can be taken by a man, like Denis de Montbec, then what is a duke, or a count, or a bishop? The hierarchy is fragile, as the English army slowly moves back towards Bordeaux, weighed down by gold and prisoners. They leave behind a France that has been decapitated. The king is gone. The nobility is dead or captured. The peasants are defenceless. And the thousands of mercenaries who were hired by the French to stop the English, they are now unemployed. The pay chests of the French army have been captured or lost. The contracts are void. These men, hardened by the fight and hungry for the lifestyle they have just witnessed, the easy wealth of the victor, do not simply go home to push a plough. They look at the chaos around them, the power vacuum left by the captive king, and they realize something terrifying. They don't need a king to make war. They have swords. They have experience. And France is wide open. Historians often mark Poitiers as a great English victory, which it was. But in the long twilight of the war, it was also the moment the bottle was uncorked. The great companies are about to be born from the debris of the French defeat. The soldiers who watched a king being auctioned off have learned their lesson well. If violence is a business, then business is good, and it is time to go independent. The prince takes his royal prisoner to England, where John will live in gilded captivity, but he leaves behind a wildfire that no treaty can extinguish. The true reign of the mercenary is about to begin, not as servants of the crown, but as masters of the countryside. The sun sets on the English victory, but a long, dark night is falling over France. The sky over the cathedral city of Chartres is usually a serene canvas of pale blue, but on Easter Monday in 1360 it turns the colour of a bruised plum. A storm of biblical ferocity descends upon the English army camped outside the walls. Hailstones the size of goose eggs pummel the earth, shattering tent poles, killing horses, and even striking down men in their armour. King Edward III, a man who has stared down French cavalry charges without blinking, looks up at the heavens and sees the wrath of God. He falls to his knees in the mud towards the cathedral spire invisible in the deluge and vows to make peace. It is a moment where weather changes history. The result is the Treaty of Bretigny, a document that is meant to end the suffering of the century, but instead distills it into a purer, more chaotic poison. On parchment, the treaty is a masterpiece of diplomacy. Edward III renounces his claim to the French throne, a claim that started the war, in exchange for a massive, undisputed empire in southwestern France. Aquitaine, Poitou, and a dozen other rich provinces are handed over to the English crown, independent of French sovereignty. King John II is ransomed for 3 million gold crowns, a sum that will bleed the French economy dry for a generation. The bells ring in London and Paris. The war, the herald's cry, is over. But peace, as the common people soon discover, is a luxury for the rich. For the thousands of professional soldiers stationed in garrisons across France, the Treaty of Bretigny is not a relief. It is a layoff notice. Imagine the scene in a damp castle in Normandy, or a fortified mill in the Loire Valley. A royal messenger arrives, his horse frothing, bearing a document with the king's seal. He reads the proclamation. The war is finished. All garrisons are to be evacuated. All soldiers are to disband and return to their homes. The captain of the garrison, a man perhaps from Gascony, or a younger son of an English knight, looks at the messenger, then at his men. They are veterans, scarred and hardened. They have lived by the sword for 20 years. They have no farms to return to, no trades other than war. If they go back to England, they are surplus labour in a recovering economy. If they stay in France without a master, they are outlaws. The silence that follows the reading of the proclamation is heavy. Then a dark realization spreads through the ranks. The king has signed a piece of paper, but he has not signed their paychecks. The peace effectively fires them without severance, and so a collective decision is made that will haunt France for decades. They will not go home. They will not lay down their arms. They will simply change management from the crown to themselves. This is the birth of the sociétés, the great companies. It is a transition from authorised warfare to unauthorised industrial-scale brigandage. The garrisons evacuate as ordered, but they do not leave the country. They move a few miles down the road, seize a different castle, one not listed in the treaty, and raise their own banners. These are not ragtag bands of deserters. They are fully structured military units with treasurers, secretaries, and chains of command. They have clerics to write their letters and blacksmiths to shoe their horses. They are wandering city-states, mobile and predatory. They call themselves the latecomers, the tarred Venus, a grimly humorous acknowledgement that they have arrived after the feast of official war, but are determined to eat the scraps. The irony of Bretigny is profound. During the war, a village might be burned by an English chevauchee once every few years. Now in peace, it is bled white every month. The companies institute a system of parties, protection money. It is a sophisticated racket. A captain will ride into a village, not with a torch, but with a ledger. He will assess the value of the harvest, the number of livestock, and the wealth of the church. He then presents the elders with a bill. Pay this amount, he says, and we will not burn you. Even better, we will give you a passport, a wooden tally stick, or a sealed parchment that proves you have paid, so the next company down the road might spare you. It is the privatization of taxation. The peasantry is now paying taxes to the king to fight a war that is over, and paying taxes to the mercenaries to survive the peace. Historians have long debated why the kings of England and France did not crush these bands immediately. The uncomfortable truth is that they couldn't. The French army was shattered at Poitiers, its leadership decapitated. The English king, having signed the treaty, was technically forbidden from intervening, and frankly, he didn't mind if his former soldiers kept the French destabilized. It was a geopolitical convenience masked as a tragedy. The companies grew bolder. They took towns, not just castles. Pont Saint-Esprit, a wealthy town on the Rhône, fell to the Great Company in 1360. They didn't storm it, they infiltrated it, seizing the bridge and holding the city for ransom. The Pope himself, residing in nearby Avignon, trembled in his palace. The mercenaries were no longer just a nuisance. They were a superpower. We see the rise of charismatic, terrifying captains during this period. Men like Séguin de Bardefol, known as the King of the Companies, who reportedly had 2,000 men under his command. He negotiated with counts and bishops as an equal. When the King of Navarre needed troops, he didn't call his vassals. He hired Bardefol. The social order was inverted. A man of low birth could become a prince in all but name, provided he had enough spears behind him. These captains wore silk, drank the finest wines, and held court in captured chateaux, while the legitimate nobility cowered behind their walls. The psychological toll on the populace was devastating. The peace of Bretigny felt like a betrayal by God. During the war, one could pray for victory. Now, there was no enemy to defeat, only a hydra of wandering bands. The chronicler Jean de Venette wrote of dogs who ate the people, describing men who had once been hailed as defenders, now turning on the flock they were supposed to guard. The distinction between English and French mercenaries dissolved. The companies were multinational corporations of violence. An English archer might fight alongside a Navarrese spearman and a German heavy cavalryman. Their language was a pidgin of French, English, and camp slangs, a dialect of the dispossessed. The countryside emptied. Fields returned to scrub. The Platte Pays, the flat country, became a no man's land. People fled to the walled cities, overcrowding them, creating slums that were breeding grounds for the next wave of plague. The economy of France began to contract, not from the destruction of war, but from the paralysis of fear. No merchant would move goods on the roads when a company might be waiting around the next bend. The arteries of trade hardened and closed. Yet, amidst this darkness, the mercenaries themselves developed a strange, perverse code of honour. They honoured their contracts with each other religiously. A captain who cheated his men would find a knife in his ribs. They held parliaments to decide on strategy and the division of spoils. They were, in a twisted way, practicing a form of democracy that was more inclusive than the feudal system they were dismantling. Meritocracy ruled. If you were good at killing, you rose. If you were incompetent, you died. It was a brutal Darwinism that produced some of the most effective military minds of the age. As the sun sets on the year 1361, the Treaty of Bretigny stands revealed as a hollow promise. The parchment is safe in the archives, but the reality on the ground is a nightmare. The free companies are now the masters of the game. They have realized that the king's law only extends as far as the king's reach, and right now, the king's reach is very short. The peace has not brought silence. It has brought a cacophony of demands, threats, and the clinking of stolen coin. The war of nations has paused, but the war of the wolf packs has just begun, and they are hungry. The great capitulation of the state is complete. The privatization of war is the new law of the land. The roads of France are no longer safe, but it is not because they are empty. It is because they are teeming with a new kind of nation, one without borders or a flag, moving like a slow, armoured locust swarm across the landscape. We are witnessing the coalescence of the great companies, the grandes compagnies, a phenomenon that terrified the medieval mind because it defied the divine order of things. In the feudal imagination, society was a pyramid. Those who prayed, those who fought, and those who worked. But here, on the dusty highways of the Rhone Valley in the early 1360s, those who fought had decided to stop serving the pyramid and simply eat it. It begins with a whisper in the camps, a realization that passes from the Gascon captains to the English archers and the German spearmen. Individually, we are bandits. Together, we are a kingdom. The small, localized gangs we saw emerge after Bretigny, the latecomers, or tarred Venus, begin to merge. It is a corporate merger of violence. A captain with 200 men joins forces with a rival who has 300. They elect a supreme commander, not based on bloodline, but on his ability to find food and negotiate ransoms. The result is an army of 15,000 seasoned veterans, a force larger, more experienced, and better equipped than the royal army of France itself. Imagine the sight of this moving city. It stretches for miles. At the front ride, the men-at-arms on their heavy destriers, armour gleaming under the layer of road dust, their lances stripped of pennons because they owe allegiance to no duke. Behind them march the infantry, the dreaded English longbowmen with their yew staves over their shoulders, men who have killed the flower of French chivalry and know they are the apex predators of this ecosystem. But look further back and you see the true scale of this society. There are wagons piled high with loot, silks from Italy, furs from the north, barrels of wine from Burgundy. There are women, camp followers, wives, prostitutes, laundresses, who form a vital part of the logistics, cooking, mending and nursing the wounded. There are blacksmiths with portable forges, fletchers making arrows by the thousands, and even lawyers and clerks to draft the treaties they force towns to sign. It is a mobile state, complete with its own economy, justice system and hierarchy. They do not need to besiege a castle to take it. They simply ride up to the gates and point to the horizon filled with their fires. Most chatelains looking at the sheer numbers, simply open the doors and ask for terms. The company takes the best quarters, eats the winter stores, and moves on, leaving a husk behind. The most audacious target of this new superpower is not a castle, but God's bank on earth. In 1362, the great company turns its eyes toward Avignon. At this time, the Pope does not live in Rome. He lives in France, in a massive fortress-like palace that represents the centre of Western Christendom's wealth. Pope Innocent VI watches from the battlements as the horizon darkens with the dust of the approaching army. These are not pious crusaders coming to kiss his ring. They are wolves coming to devour the shepherd. The panic in Avignon is palpable. The cardinals, men used to wielding the spiritual sword of excommunication, suddenly realize that spiritual swords do not cut through brigandine armor. They frantically try to raise a defense, repairing the city walls and hiring, ironically, other mercenaries to defend them. But the great company is too strong. They encircle the city, cutting off the supplies. The vineyards of the papacy, the source of the sacramental wine and the cardinal's dinner, are trampled. The Pope attempts to use his ultimate weapon. He excommunicates the entire company. He casts them out of the church, damning their souls to eternal hellfire. The captains of the great company, men who have walked through the hell of Crécy and Poitiers, are unimpressed. They send a message back: "We are already damned. We want gold." It is a theological impasse resolved by economics. The Pope caves. He opens the treasury and pays a staggering ransom, tens of thousands of florins, to the very men he has just cursed. But there is a twist, a moment of dark humour that defines the era. The mercenary leaders, perhaps feeling the weight of their mortality, or simply enjoying the irony, demand that the Pope also lift the excommunication and grant them absolution for their sins. They want the cash and the forgiveness. And the Pope, desperate to see them leave, agrees. Imagine the scene: a rugged captain, his armour stained with the blood of 100 peasants, kneeling before a terrified cardinal to receive a blessing, while his men load carts with papal gold in the background. It is the ultimate transactional moment. They ride away richer and technically sinless. Historians still argue whether this capitulation by the Church destroyed the moral authority of the papacy for a century, paving the way for the later reformations, or if it was simply a pragmatic survival strategy. Either way, the message to the common people is devastating. God cannot protect you, and the king cannot save you. The only law is power. The great company flows north now, gorged on papal gold. They are heading toward the rich lands of Burgundy and the Lyonnais. They are unstoppable. The King of France, John II, who has returned from his captivity in England, is powerless. His treasury is empty from paying his own ransom, and his army is a shadow of its former self. He tries to hire them to go on a crusade, to fight the Turks, to go anywhere but France. They take his crusade money and simply stay put. Why march to the dry deserts of the Holy Land when the wine is sweet in the Loire? The leadership of these companies is evolving. We see men like Séguin de Bardefol, whom we met briefly, now operating at the peak of his power. He styles himself a king of the companions. He holds court. He issues safe conducts. He is, for all intents and purposes, the ruler of a floating kingdom. But he is not alone. Other captains, English and Gascon, are rising. The archpriest, Arnaud de Servoles, a renegade churchman turned brigand warlord, is another. He fights for the king when the pay is good, and for himself when it isn't. He is a terrifying figure, a man who knows the liturgy, but prefers the lance. The existence of the great company forces a change in the very fabric of society. Villages begin to fortify themselves. The fortified churches of the south of France, you can still see them today with their thick walls and arrow slits, are built not against Saracens but against these wandering Christian soldiers. Peasants turn their houses into bunkers. The open, trusting architecture of the high medieval period gives way to a defensive, claustrophobic style. Fear becomes the architect. The latecomers are not just a military force, they are a social solvent, dissolving the bonds of feudalism. If a lord cannot protect his serfs from the archpriest, why should the serfs harvest his wheat? The unspoken contract is broken. In the camps of the Great Company, a different kind of meritocracy takes hold. A man is judged by his prowess, not his birth. It is a brutal, violent freedom, but freedom nonetheless. They are free companies, not just because they are independent, but because they have freed themselves from the social hierarchy. As the winter of 1361 to 1362 deepens, the Great Company settles into winter quarters near Lyon. They are preparing for the spring campaign season. The French crown, desperate to crush this hydra, finally gathers an army. It is a royal host, commanded by the Count of Tancarville and the Count of La Marche, the highest nobility of the realm. They are confident. They are fighting brigands after all, scum, rabble, men without honour. They believe that noble blood and heavy cavalry will simply sweep these upstarts away. They are marching toward a small town called Brignais. The mercenaries, resting in their camps, hear of the approach. They do not flee, they do not scatter. Instead, they form up. They look at their captains, men who have fought in the mud for 20 years, and then they look at the royal banners approaching, carried by soft-handed aristocrats who think war is a tournament. The mercenaries smile. They know something the counts do not. They know that war is not about who has the best lineage. It is about who holds the high ground and who strikes first. The scum are about to teach the flower of chivalry. Another painful lesson. The sun sets on the eve of battle, and the Great Company waits silent and disciplined, a coiled snake ready to strike at the heel of the French monarchy. The mist clings to the rolling hills outside Brignais on the morning of April 6, 1362, shrouding the world in a deceptive, ghostly white. It is a quiet morning, the kind that usually promises a warm spring day, but the birds are silent, unnerved by the thousands of men shifting in the damp grass. We are witnessing the collision of two worlds, the old, rigid hierarchy of feudal France and the new, fluid brutality of the free companies. The French royal army, led by Jacques de Bourbon, Count of La Marche and the Count of Tancarville, is confident to the point of negligence. They have brought the flower of chivalry to crush a peasant revolt, or so they believe. To them, the mercenaries camped on the heights are merely bandits, canaille, a rabble of deserters and thieves who will scatter at the first sight of a royal banner. They do not understand that they are marching not against a disorderly mob, but against a corporation of violence that has been refining its trade for 20 years. The commanders of the Great Company, men like Séguin de Bardefol and the terrifyingly efficient Petit Méchin, watch from the ridge. They are not drinking or boasting. They are calculating angles of descent and checking the ground for soft spots that might mire a heavy horse. They have positioned their main force not in the open field, but hidden using the terrain as a cloak. It is the professional's edge. Never fight a fair fight if you can help it. As the French vanguard begins its ascent, sluggish, from a night of heavy wine and confident laughter, the trap is sprung. It does not begin with a trumpet blast, but with a cascade of stones and tactical debris rolled down the slopes, followed by a storm of crossbow bolts that hum like angry wasps in the mist. The French knights, weighed down by plate and pride, are thrown into confusion. Their horses stumble on the loose rock. The lines of communication shatter instantly. Then the main body of the mercenaries strikes. They do not charge with the frantic energy of desperate men, but with the synchronized weight of a sledgehammer. The chronicles describe a scene of utter chaos where the rabble fights with a coordination that shames the knights. The mercenaries work in pairs and trios, one man hooking a shield, another driving a dagger into the gap of a visor. It is intimate, skilled butchery. The Comte de la Marche, a prince of the blood royal, finds himself unhorsed, surrounded not by fellow nobles who might ransom him for a polite sum, but by rough-bearded men shouting in a mix of Gascon and English, who see him only as a walking sack of gold. He fights bravely. Historians generally agree on his courage, if not his tactical acumen. But bravery is poor armour against a halberd. He and his son are mortally wounded, their noble blood soaking into the same indifferent earth as the mercenaries they despised. The defeat is total. The royal army evaporates. The wolves have not just bitten the hand of the king, they have torn the arm off. The shockwave that radiates out from Brignais travels faster than any horseman. In the courts of Paris and Avignon, the news is met with stunned silence. The unthinkable has happened. The king's own army, the instrument of God's justice on earth, has been crushed by a band of unemployed soldiers. The social order is not just threatened, it is inverted. The mercenaries are now the masters of the Rhone Valley. They do not flee the scene of their crime, they settle in. They take the castle of Brignais and turn it into their headquarters, a bandit capital in the heart of France. From here, they fan out, raiding with impunity. The logic of the world has broken down. If the king cannot protect his people, then the people must make their own deals with the devil. Villages and monasteries begin to negotiate directly with the captains, bypassing the royal administration entirely. The partis, the protection rackets, become the only law that matters. In the aftermath, a strange sword of paralysis grips the French crown. King John II, still in England or in transit, and his son, the Dauphin Charles, realise that they cannot defeat these men in open battle. The Great Company is too strong, too mobile, and frankly, too good at what they do. The mercenaries are better at war than the state is. This creates a profound existential crisis. Scholarly debates often circle around this moment. Was Brignais the point where the medieval state realised it had to monopolise violence to survive? It certainly seems so. The humiliation forces the monarchy to think creatively. If they cannot kill the wolves, perhaps they can feed them elsewhere. The idea begins to circulate in the desperate whispers of the royal council. We must export this problem. We must find a war, any war, far away from here, and pay these men to go fight it. It is a grimly humorous solution, like trying to get rid of a termite infestation by suggesting the termites might enjoy the wood in your neighbour's house much more. But who is the neighbour? The eyes of the French strategists turn south, across the Pyrenees, to the sun-baked lands of Castile. There a vicious civil war is brewing between King Peter the Cruel and his half-brother, Henry of Trastamara. It is a family feud, writ large, full of poison, murder, and illegitimacy, perfect soil for mercenaries. The French see an opportunity. If they can persuade the great companies to march into Spain under the guise of a crusade against the Moors, or simply to support Henry, they can drain the poison from France. But to lead such a dangerous, unruly herd of predators, they need a shepherd who is half wolf himself. They need a man who understands the mercenary mind because he has lived it. They need Bertrand du Guesclin. Du Guesclin is one of the most fascinating figures of the century, a Breton knight of minor nobility, described by chroniclers as the ugliest man in Brittany, with a face like a potato and a body like a beer barrel. He is not a courtier, he is a brawler. He rose through the ranks not by jousting, but by leading guerrilla raids and winning dirty skirmishes. The mercenaries respect him because he is one of them, in spirit. He fights for pay, he fights to win, and he doesn't care about the colour of the banner as long as the coin is good. The king summons him. The task is simple. Gather the great companies, bribe them with the promise of Spanish gold and papal forgiveness, and lead them out of France. It is a Pied Piper mission, but the rats are armed with battle axes. As du Guesclin rides to the mercenary camps, the atmosphere shifts. The captains, men who have just destroyed a royal army, listen to him. He speaks their language. He talks of the riches of Castile, of the weakness of King Peter, of the easy plunder waiting in the south. He doesn't appeal to their patriotism. They have none, but to their greed and their restlessness. Why starve here in a ruined land, he might have argued, when a fat new kingdom awaits? The captains of the great companies, bored with their static occupation of the Rhone and sensing that the forage is running low, begin to nod. The great migration is about to begin. The peasants of the Lyonnais watch with disbelief as the camps at Brigny are struck. The wagons are loaded, the armour is polished, and the wolves begin to move south. It is an exodus of violence. The Grande Compagnie form a column that stretches for leagues, a moving city of 30,000 souls, marching away from the heart of France. The relief is palpable, a physical weight lifting from the chest of the nation. Church bells ring, not in alarm, but in cautious thanksgiving. The wolves are leaving, but as they march toward the Pyrenees, the sun glinting on thousands of lance tips, one cannot help but feel a pang of sympathy for Spain. The infection has not been cured, it has merely been transferred. The Battle of Brigny proved that the mercenaries were the masters of France. The coming campaign will decide if they can be the kingmakers of Castile. The road is long, the dust is thick, and the song of the mercenary is now a Spanish guitar, strummed with a mailed fist. The air grows thinner and colder as the great companies begin their ascent into the Pyrenees, leaving the ravaged fields of France behind for the jagged spine that divides the world. It is late in 1365, and the column of men stretches like a dark scar against the snow, a migration of 30,000 souls seeking a new host to parasitize. Leading this motley crusade is Bertrand du Guesclin, the Eagle of Brittany, a man whose face is as rough as the terrain he navigates, squat, broad-nosed, and possessing a charm that is entirely devoid of courtly grace, but overflowing with the rough charisma of the camp. He has promised these men gold, absolution, and a war that matters, a crusade against the Moors of Granada. But as they cross the mountain passes, shivering in their looted furs, the mercenaries know the truth. They are not marching for God. They are marching because the King of France has paid them to leave, and the Pope has paid them to keep walking. It is a holy expulsion, a divine eviction notice, served at the point of a lance. The destination is Castile, a kingdom locked in a fratricidal nightmare between King Peter, known to history as the Cruel, and his illegitimate half-brother, Henry of Trastamara. To the mercenaries, the politics are irrelevant details. What matters is that Henry has promised to open the treasury of Castile to anyone who helps him seize the crown. The arrival of the great companies in Spain is a shock to the system of the peninsula. The Castilian style of war is lighter, faster, built around the jinetes, light cavalry who throw javelins and retreat. They are unprepared for the heavy, grinding discipline of the veterans of the 100 Years' War. The campaign is almost disappointingly easy. King Peter, terrified by the size of the army approaching him, flees his capital without a fight. He runs first to Seville, then to Galicia, and finally takes a ship to English-held Bordeaux, clutching his treasury and his daughters. Henry of Trastamara walks into Burgos and is crowned King of Castile, surrounded by cheering French mercenaries who are already calculating the exchange rate of the local currency. It seems like the perfect operation, a swift regime change, a massive payout, and a new ally for France. Du Guesclin is the hero of the hour, showered with titles and land. The mercenaries settle into the warm and dry climate of the Spanish plateau, enjoying the wine and the adulation. They believe the war is over. They are wrong. They have merely poked a sleeping lion. In Bordeaux, the exiled King Peter kneels before the Black Prince. It is a meeting of two different kinds of desperation. Peter is a king without a kingdom. The prince is a warrior without a war. Since the Peace of Bretagne, the prince has been ruling as the Duke of Aquitaine, a role that involves far too much accounting and far too little glory for his taste. His court is extravagant, his debts are mounting, and his health is beginning to fail. Some historians argue he was already suffering from the dysentery or dropsy that would eventually kill him. When Peter offers him a fortune to reclaim the Castilian throne, including the famous Black Prince's ruby that still sits in the British imperial state crown today, the prince cannot resist. It is not just about the money, it is about the game. The prince sees a chance to checkmate French influence in Spain and to prove, once again, that he is the greatest captain of the age. He summons his own mercenaries. The call goes out. The free companies, who had stayed behind or drifted north, suddenly have a new contract. The war has become a mirror image of itself. French-backed mercenaries supporting Henry against English-backed mercenaries supporting Peter. The Spanish detour has become a proxy war for the supremacy of Europe. The campaign that follows in 1367 is a masterclass in suffering. The prince leads his army across the Pyrenees in winter through the pass of Roncesvalles, the legendary site of Roland's death. The wind howls, freezing men in their saddles. Provisions fail. The army is hungry, cold, and miserable, but the prince drives them on with an iron will. He is seeking a decisive battle, the kind of set-piece slaughter that solved problems at Crécy and Poitiers. Du Guesclin, on the other side, knows this. He advises Henry, do not fight him, starve him, let the land kill the English. It is sound mercenary advice, strategic patience over aristocratic ego. But Henry, flushed with his new kingship and unwilling to look weak before his subjects, ignores the professional. He wants to crush the invader. He marches out to meet the prince near the town of Nájera. The Battle of Nájera, fought on April 3rd, 1367, is the tactical masterpiece of the Black Prince's career and arguably the last great victory of the English longbow in the 14th century. The terrain is flat, a dusty plain with no hedges to hide behind. It looks like a fair fight, which is exactly what Du Guesclin fears. The Spanish troops, used to skirmishing, are baffled by the English refusal to break formation. The English archers, dismounting and forming their terrifying harrow formation, unleash a storm of arrows that darkens the Spanish sun. But unlike in France, the Spanish have slingers, troops who can hurl stones with lethal force. For a moment, the air is filled with a deadly exchange of lead and iron. Then, the heavy infantry clash. It is a brutal, grinding shove. Du Guesclin leads the French vanguard, fighting with the desperate strength of a man who knows he is doomed by his employer's stupidity. He pushes back the English line, his battle axe rising and falling like a piston. But on the flanks, the Spanish cavalry melts away under the arrow storm. The English reserves flank the French line, the trap closes, the rout is absolute. The river Nájera runs red with blood. Thousands of French and Spanish soldiers are cut down as they try to cross the bridge to safety. Du Guesclin, surrounded and exhausted, surrenders to an English squire. He is a prisoner again, his ransom set at a king's ransom, literally. Legend says that when the prince later asked him Why he set his own price so high? Du Guesclin replied, because the King of France and the King of Castile will both pay to have me back. I am that valuable. It is the ultimate mercenary boast. My worth is determined by the market, and the market says I am expensive. But the victory at Nargera is a poisoned chalice. King Peter, restored to his throne, reveals his true nature. He is vindictive, executing prisoners the prince had hoped to ransom. Worse, he is broke. The massive sums he promised to the English and Gascon mercenaries, they don't exist. He claims the treasury was looted. The Black Prince, sitting in the heat of the Spanish summer, waits for payment that never comes. His army begins to rot. Dysentery sweeps through the camp, killing more men than the battle did. The prince himself falls deeper into illness, his body bloating, his energy fading. The mercenaries, realizing they have been stiffed, turn surly. They have won the crown for Peter, but they cannot eat glory. The retreat from Spain is a ghostly echo of the invasion. The English army limps back across the mountains, broken, sick, and unpaid. The Black Prince returns to Bordeaux, not as a conqueror, but as a dying man with a bankrupt treasury. And the irony, as soon as the English leave, Henry of Trastamara comes back. He rallies the survivors, hires new mercenaries, and within 2 years he defeats and kills Peter in a personal knife fight in a tent. The Castilian detour has achieved nothing but death and debt. The mercenaries who survived the adventure drift back into France, hardened by the betrayal. They have learned a bitter lesson. Kings lie. The only thing that is real is what you can hold in your hand. The great companies reform in the south of France, hungry and angry. They look at the lands of Aquitaine, the prince's own lands, and decide that if the prince won't pay them his wages, they will take them from his peasants. The war comes home. The detour is over, but the road to ruin is wider than ever. The prince lies in his bed in Bordeaux, listening to the reports of burning villages, knowing that the very men he led to victory are now the wolves at his door. The cycle of violence has completed a full revolution, and the wheel is grinding everyone into dust. The wind that blows from the Pyrenees is cold and carries the scent of pine and old snow, but if you turn your face to the southeast, towards the Alps, the air changes. It becomes warmer, laced with the smell of cypress, lemon, and dust. While France is a ruin of mud and burnt timber, and Spain is a slaughterhouse of dynastic ambition, Italy is a garden. It is a land of marble cities, wealthy merchants, and fractured politics, a puzzle of city-states like Florence, Pisa, Milan, and Siena, all hating each other with a passion that is almost artistic, and where there is hate and gold, there is a market. As the 100 Years' War pauses and sputters in the north, the most ambitious of the mercenaries realize that the true fortune lies not in the service of a bankrupt king, but in the employ of a nervous banker. We are crossing the mountains now, leaving the grey feudalism of the north for the golden light of Tuscany. We are entering the age of the condottieri, the contractors, and among them walks a figure who will become a legend, a ghost who still haunts the Duomo of Florence today. His name is John Hawkwood. To the Italians, struggling with the harsh consonants of his English name, he is Giovanni Acuto, John the Sharp. It is a fitting mistake. He is indeed sharp, a man who treats war not as a vocation of honour, but as a rigid accounting ledger. The myth of his origins is delightful in its absurdity. They say he was a tailor from Essex, a man who traded his needle for a sword. Historians still argue over this, debating whether he was a tanner's son or a minor landowner, but the image of the tailor sticks because it captures the essence of his genius. He cuts his coat according to his cloth. He stitches armies together from the scraps of other companies. He understands the texture of the market. Hawkwood does not fight for a cause. He fights for the highest bidder, and unlike the chaotic raiders of France, he delivers a product. When he signs a contract, a condota, he honours it with a terrifying professionalism. He leads the White Company. The name itself is a stroke of branding genius. Some say it comes from their surcoats, bleached white by the sun. Others claim it is because they polish their armour to a mirror sheen, so bright that when they crest a hill, they look like a radiant, blinding wave of light. Imagine them marching through the Tuscan countryside. They are not a rabble, they move in silence, a glistening column of steel and leather. Their primary weapon is not the sword, but the long lance, heavy and thick. In battle they do not ride, they dismount. This is the English manner of fighting brought to the warm south. 2 men-at-arms hold a single lance, forming a prickly hedge of steel, while a third, a page or support soldier, holds their horses in the rear. It is a slow, grinding formation, a porcupine that can roll over anything in its path. And on the flanks, of course, are the longbowmen. In the tight, enclosed valleys of Italy, the longbow is a terrifying surprise. The Italian crossbowmen, used to a slower, more deliberate exchange of bolts, are withered by the sheer volume of English arrows. Hawkwood is the master of this machine. He is not a young man when he arrives. He is in his 40s, an age when most soldiers are looking for a quiet monastery to retire to. But Hawkwood is just getting started. He serves Pisa against Florence, then he serves Florence against Pisa, then he serves the Pope, then Milan. He is the ultimate free agent. There is a famous story, perhaps apocryphal but emotionally true, where 2 friars approach him and say, "God give you peace." "Sir?" Hawkwood stares at them with cold blue eyes and replies, "And God take away your arms." When the friars are shocked, he explains, "Do you not know that I live by war, and that peace would be my undoing?" It is a moment of brutal honesty. He knows exactly what he is. He is a merchant of death in a buyer's market. The warfare in Italy is different from the scorched earth campaigns of France. It is more cerebral, almost theatrical. The goal is rarely to annihilate the enemy, for a dead enemy cannot pay ransom and a destroyed city cannot pay taxes. The goal is to maneuver, to threaten, to checkmate. Hawkwood excels at this. He moves his White Company with a speed that baffles his opponents. He conducts night marches, unheard of in Italian warfare, appearing at dawn outside a city gate when the defenders are still asleep. He uses psychological warfare, spreading rumours of his arrival to terrify a town into surrendering its gold without a single arrow being loosed. It is a form of extortion raised to a high art. The city fathers of Siena or Perugia see the dust cloud on the horizon and simply send out a herald with a bag of florins. "Here is the price of your absence," they say. Hawkwood takes the gold, counts it, signs a receipt and turns his horses around. It is a transaction, clean and bloodless. Yet, when violence is required, he is ruthless. The massacre at Cesena in 1377 is the dark stain that no amount of white armour can hide. Hired by the Cardinal Robert of Geneva, later the anti-pope Clement VII, to put down a rebellion, Hawkwood's men, along with Breton mercenaries, unleash a horror that shocks even this violent age. They herd the citizens into the town square, promising amnesty, and then, at a signal, the butchery begins. Thousands die. It is a reminder that beneath the polished armour and the polite contracts, the mercenary is still a wolf. Hawkwood, ever the pragmatist, likely viewed it as fulfilling the terms of his employment. The cardinal ordered blood. He delivered it. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, the Italians are fascinated by him. He becomes a celebrity. The Duke of Milan, Bernabo Visconti, gives him his illegitimate daughter Donina in marriage. The Tailor of Essex marries into one of the most powerful families in Europe. It is the ultimate social climb. He acquires castles, vineyards, and estates. He becomes a fixture of Italian politics, our Englishman, a necessary evil that eventually becomes just necessary. The Florentines, who fought him for years, eventually hire him as their captain general. They pay him a pension. They give him citizenship. They realize that the only way to be safe from John Hawkwood is to own him. As he ages, the White Company evolves. The English veterans die off or retire, replaced by Hungarians, Germans, and Italians who adopt the English tactics. The English company becomes a multinational corporation, but the brand remains. Hawkwood, now an old man in his 70s, still rides out. He is a survivor. He has outlived the Black Prince, King Edward III, and most of the captains he fought with at Crécy. He has turned war into a stable career. He dies in 1394, quietly, in his bed in Florence, a rare end for a man of his profession. The Florentines give him a magnificent state funeral. They promise to build him a marble tomb, but money is tight, so instead they hire the great artist Paolo Uccello to paint a fresco of a statue on the wall of the Duomo. You can see it today if you walk into the cool, echoey vastness of the cathedral. There he sits on his horse, painted in terra verde, green earth pigment, looking every inch the Roman general. The inscription calls him Johannes Acutus, the most prudent captain of his age. It is a masterpiece of Renaissance propaganda. The tailored general is immortalized, not as a bandit, but as a hero of the Republic. The painting is a flat image trying to look three-dimensional, a perfect metaphor for the mercenary life, a carefully constructed illusion of nobility covering a flat, hard reality of greed. Hawkwood's legacy is profound. He professionalized the Italian wars. He taught the city-states that defense was a commodity you bought, not a duty you performed. He paved the way for the great Italian condottieri of the next century, men like Sforza and Braccio, who would take the model of the White Company and use it to become dukes themselves. But he also left a warning. As the Florentines looked up at that fresco, they must have wondered, if we have to pay a foreigner to defend our liberty, is it really our liberty anymore? The sun sets over the Arno, turning the river to molten gold. Much like the Florins, Hawkwood spent his life chasing. The age of the foreign freebooter is peaking, but the seeds of its destruction are already being sown. For in the north, a new king is rising, and with him, a new idea. That an army should not be a rental car, but a part of the nation's very soul. We must leave the Cypress hills of Tuscany now, and return to the mud of France, where the final bloody act of the 100 Years' War is about to begin. The longbows are coming back, but this time they will face a different kind of enemy. The rain that falls on the fields of Picardy in October 1415 is not a cleansing shower. It is a relentless, freezing misery that turns the earth into a grey, sucking paste. We are standing on a narrow strip of ploughed land between the woods of Agincourt and Tramecourt. It is St. Crispin's Day, a holy feast, but the men shivering in the pre-dawn gloom feel abandoned by God. They are the English army of King Henry V, and they are a wreck. They are not the fresh-faced boys who left Southampton months ago. They are skeletons wrapped in rust. Dysentery, the bloody flux, has ravaged their ranks since the siege of Harfleur. Men are fighting with their breeches cut away because they cannot control their bowels. They are exhausted, starving, and outnumbered, 5-1 by the glittering, well-fed host of France blocking their path to Calais. Yet, if you look into their eyes, you do not see the panic of a mob. You see the cold, hard stare of the professional. This is the mature form of the mercenary army we saw born at Crécy. Every man here, from the lowest archer to the highest duke, is under a strict indenture of war. They are here by contract, and their CEO is a 28-year-old king with a scar on his face from an arrow wound, a man who treats war not as a game, but as a divine lawsuit he intends to win. Henry V has perfected the business of killing. He has moved beyond the chaotic looting of the Black Prince. His ordinances are strict. No burnings of churches, no raping of women, no unauthorized pillage. He hangs his own men, even old friends, who break these rules. It is a terrifying discipline designed to show that he is the rightful king of France, not a bandit. But make no mistake, his men are mercenaries in spirit, if not in name. They are here for the wages, currently in arrears, and the promise of ransoms. The archers, driving 6-foot sharpened stakes into the mud to protect themselves from cavalry, are preparing a kill zone with the efficiency of engineers. They know the French will charge. The French always charge. It is the one constant in a changing world. The French nobility, packed so tightly in their heavy plate armour that they can barely lift their arms, are victims of their own vanity. They have relearned nothing from the slaughter of their grandfathers. The battle begins not with a roar, but with a silence, followed by the terrifying thwip, thwip, thwip of the English longbows. The arrows strike the French vanguard like a sudden hailstorm, but the real horror is the mud. As the French knights charge, their horses bog down, sinking to their hocks. The knights are thrown, flailing like overturned turtles in the sludge. Those who stay on their feet trudge forward, heads down, blinded by visors, pressing into the arrow storm. When the lines finally meet, it is not a fencing match, it is a crush. The French are packed so dense that the men in the third rank cannot even swing their swords. They are suffocated by the weight of their own numbers. The English archers, seeing the arrows are spent and the knights are immobilized, drop their bows. They pick up mallets, axes, and daggers, tools of the camp, and swarm the knights. It is the victory of light infantry over heavy tanks. A yeoman with a lead hammer can kill a duke with a single blow to the helmet, denting the skull beneath without ever piercing the steel. It is unglamorous, sweaty, industrial work. Then a moment occurs that defines the brutal pragmatism of this new age. In the heat of the killing, a rumour spreads that a new French force is attacking the rear, raiding the baggage train. Henry, fearing his exhausted army will be overwhelmed if they have to guard thousands of prisoners, gives an order that chills the blood of every knight on the field. Kill the prisoners. The mercenaries and nobles hesitate. This is not out of moral outrage, but economic horror. A living prisoner is a walking bank account. A dead one is just meat. To kill a knight is to burn money. Henry, seeing their hesitation, threatens to hang anyone who disobeys and sends a squad of his own archers, men with no social standing to lose, to do the job. The result is a massacre within a massacre. Men who had surrendered, who were sitting on the ground waiting for a glass of wine and a ransom negotiation, are stabbed in the throat or bludgeoned. It is a war crime by modern standards and a financial tragedy by theirs, but it works. The French will to fight evaporates. The new attack never materializes. Henry has chosen survival over profit, a decision only a fanatic or a genius would make. Historians still debate the morality of this moment, but few debate its effectiveness. The field of Agincourt is left silent save for the groans of the dying and the squelch of boots pulling free from the red mud. The flower of French nobility is dead. Again. The Constable of France, the Admiral, dukes, counts, all gone. The English army, sick and shaking with adrenaline, has achieved the impossible. They have destroyed the French ruling class for the third time in a century. But as they strip the dead of their rings and armour, there is a sense of weariness. The myth of Agincourt is often painted as a glorious triumph of the underdog, but for the men there it was a desperate, ugly struggle in a latrine of their own making. They do not march on to conquer Paris. They limp to Calais to go home. They are too few to hold what they have killed. Yet the shock of Agincourt breaks something in the French psyche. The civil war between the Armagnacs and the Burgundians, the two great rival factions in France, intensifies. The Duke of Burgundy, seeing the weakness of the French crown, effectively allies with the English. This opens the door for the most complete English conquest of the war. In the years following Agincourt, Henry V returns, not with a raid, but with a siege train. He takes Normandy town by town, castle by castle. He pays his men with land, settling English archers on French farms, trying to create a permanent colony. It is the first real attempt to make the dual monarchy a reality. The mercenary character of the war shifts again. It becomes a war of garrisons. Soldiers are no longer wandering bandits. They are occupying troops. They sit in damp castles in Rouen, Caen, and Falaise, exacting tribute from the locals, which is just a polite word for extortion. The free companies are less free now. They are cogs in a royal administration, but the pay is still irregular, and the discipline is hard. A soldier in Henry's Normandy is a bureaucrat of violence, checking passes, guarding grain shipments, and hanging partisans. It is a grinding, unromantic occupation. The English are winning, yes, but they are stretching themselves thin, like butter scraped over too much bread. And then the unthinkable happens. Henry V, the warrior king, the man who seemed invincible, dies. He does not die in battle. He dies of dysentery, the same bloody flux that plagued his men at the siege of Meaux in 1422. He leaves behind an infant son, Henry VI, and a brother, the Duke of Bedford, to manage a conquest that is already starting to fray at the edges. The English have reached the high water mark. They hold Paris. They hold the north. They have a treaty that makes the English king the heir to the French throne. But they have forgotten one thing. France is not just a collection of castles and nobles. It is a people. And deep in the countryside, in the village of Domremy, a young girl is starting to hear voices. The war of contracts and indentures is about to collide with a force it cannot calculate, faith. The mercenaries, who believe only in gold, are about to meet a teenager who believes only in God. The mud of Agincourt dries, and the dust of a new legend begins to swirl. The year is 1429, and the kingdom of France has shrunk to a miserable rump state south of the Loire, a kingdom of Bourges, ruled by a disinherited, doubting Dauphin, Charles VII. The English and their Burgundian allies hold everything that matters: Paris, Normandy, the north. They are laying siege to Orléans, the last padlock on the door to the south. If Orléans falls, France is effectively finished. In the camp surrounding the city, the English mercenaries under the Earl of Salisbury and the fearsome John Talbot sit in their earthworks, confident in the slow, suffocating math of a siege. They are professionals. They have built bastilles, fortified wooden towers, to starve the city out. They are fighting a war of logistics and patience, a war they have won a dozen times before. But inside the French lines, something inexplicable is happening. A rumour is spreading, carried by the desperate whispers of soldiers who have lost every battle they have fought for a generation. They say a girl has come, not a queen, not a duchess, but a peasant from the marches of Lorraine, dressed in men's armour, claiming to speak for the King of Heaven. To the hardened mercenary captains defending Orléans, men like the bastard of Orléans, later Count Dunois, and the legendary Gascon brigand Etienne de Vignoles, better known as La Hire. This should be a joke. La Hire is the quintessential mercenary of the age, violent, profane, and practically incapable of speaking a sentence without taking the Lord's name in vain. He is a man who loots for a living, The idea that he would take orders from a teenage mystic is absurd. Yet when Joan of Arc arrives at the court in Chinon and then rides to Orléans, the impossible happens. She does not bring new tactics. She brings a terrifying, irrational certainty. She marches into the camp and immediately disrupts the mercenary ecosystem. She banishes the prostitutes, the camp followers, who are an essential part of the army's logistics. She forbids swearing. Imagine the shock of a veteran archer, a man who was killed for pay for 20 years, being told by a farm girl to stop cursing and go to confession. It is a culture clash of the highest order. La Hire, strangely, submits. There is a famous, perhaps apocryphal, story where he asks her if he can at least swear by his baton, and she allows it. He is captivated. He, a man who knows the price of everything, has found something he cannot buy. Belief. The lifting of the siege of Orléans in May 1429 is not a masterpiece of strategy. It is a triumph of morale over professionalism. The English are terrified. They are used to fighting French knights. They know how to kill aristocrats. But they do not know how to fight a witch. When Joan rides out to the Bastilles, holding her banner high, ignoring the arrows, the English archers' hands shake. Their discipline, the very foundation of their dominance, cracks. They see demons where there are only soldiers. The French, emboldened by her presence, charge with a ferocity they haven't shown since the days of Du Guesclin. They storm the forts, not for coin, but for la pucelle. The siege is broken in days. The English, led by Talbot, retreat, baffled by this violation of the rules of war. But the true turning point for the mercenary history of the war comes a month later at the Battle of Patay. This is the Agincourt in reverse, but it is also the death knell of the English longbow dominance. The English are retreating, trying to regroup. Their archers are not ready. They have not planted their stakes. A stag, startled by the army, runs through the English lines, and the archers give a shout. The French scouts hear it. La Hire and the vanguard, mostly mounted mercenaries, do not wait for the main army. They charge instantly. They catch the English archers in the open before they can draw their bows. It is a slaughter. The invincible yeomen are cut down by heavy cavalry. Talbot, the great English captain, is captured. The myth of English tactical supremacy is shattered, not by a saint, but by a mercenary cavalry charge led by a man inspired by a saint. The coronation of Charles VII at Reims follows, a surreal moment where the Dauphin is anointed king while surrounded by rough men in battered armour who are weeping openly. But the story of Joan and the mercenaries has a final, grim chapter that reminds us of the true nature of this war. In 1430, Joan is captured outside Compiègne. She is not taken by the English, but by the Burgundians, specifically a nobleman named John of Luxembourg. He is a mercenary in all but name. He holds her not as a prisoner of war, but as an asset. He knows her value. The English want her desperate enough to pay a king's ransom. For months Joan languishes in a tower while the haggling happens. It is the ultimate mercenary transaction. How much is a saint worth? The price is finally settled. 10,000 livres tournois. The English pay it. The Burgundians hand her over. It is a cold, hard sale. The girl who saved France is sold like a prize mare to her executioners. The sheer banality of the transaction is heartbreaking. To John of Luxembourg, she was just inventory. To the English, she was a propaganda problem to be burned. Joan's death in the marketplace of Rouen in 1431 is intended to end the madness, but it does the opposite. It sanctifies the resistance. The mercenaries who fought alongside her, La Hire, Dunois, Xaintrailles, are changed men. They are still killers, yes, and they still demand pay, but they are now fighting for a France that is more than just a collection of fiefs. They are fighting for a nation that Joan hallucinated into existence. The war has shifted from a feudal dispute over land to a national struggle for survival. The English meanwhile, are demoralized. The goddams, as the French call them, mocking their favourite curse, have lost their mojo. The longbow is still deadly, but it is no longer magic. The Duke of Bedford dies in 1435, and shortly after, the Duke of Burgundy, sensing the wind has changed, switches sides. The Treaty of Arras ends the civil war between Armagnacs and Burgundians. Suddenly, the English are alone against a united France. The mercenaries who had thrived on the chaos of the civil war find their employment options narrowing. The free companies are being squeezed. The King of France, Charles VII, is now rich enough and strong enough to begin thinking about a new kind of army, one that doesn't rely on the whims of captains like La Hire or the unpredictable inspiration of a teenage martyr. He wants a machine. As the smoke from Joan's pyre drifts away, it reveals a landscape that is fundamentally different. The era of the chevauchée is over. The English can no longer ride through France with impunity. They are hunkered down in their garrisons, waiting for the end. And the French, they are building something new. In the forges of the Royal Arsenal, a new sound is being heard. Not the clang of hammers on armour, but the grinding of powder and the casting of bronze. The Bureau brothers are mixing chemicals. The age of the knight is dying, and the age of artillery is being born. The mercenaries will have to adapt or perish, for a cannonball does not care about your contract, your courage, or your prayers. The air of the 1440s tastes different. It no longer carries the copper tang of blood mixed with rain, nor the wood smoke of burning thatch. It smells of rotten eggs, of brimstone, charcoal, and saltpetre. The alchemy of death has changed. We are entering the age of the Bureau brothers, Jean and Gaspard, two men who look less like warriors and more like accountants, yet who will do more to end the 100 Years' War than 1,000 knights in shining armour. They are not mercenaries in the traditional sense of swinging a sword for pay. They are the ultimate contractors of the new age, technocrats who sell the King of France not courage, but physics. Jean is a lawyer by training, a man of papers and precision. Gaspard is the logistician. Together, they look at the chaos of medieval warfare and see an engineering problem. Their solution is the culverin, the bombard, and the serpentine, black iron tubes that cough fire and spit death. King Charles VII, the man Joan of Arc crowned, has grown up. He is no longer the King of Bourges, paralysed by indecision. He is a monarch with a steady tax revenue, and he pours this gold into the Bureau brothers' foundry. They create the first true artillery train in history. Before this, cannons were temperamental beasts, often as dangerous to their crews as to the enemy, firing stone balls that shattered on impact. The bureaus standardise the calibers. They introduce iron cannonballs that do not shatter but smash. They put their guns on wheeled carriages, making them mobile. It is a revolution. Suddenly, the English castles in Normandy, those great stone leviathans that took Henry V months to starve into submission, are obsolete. The campaign of 1449 is a shock to the English system. It is a blitzkrieg in slow motion. The French army, led by the Counts of Dunois and Clermont but powered by the Bureau brothers, rolls up to a castle. They do not dig in for a siege. They simply set up their batteries. Boom, boom, boom. The walls, built to withstand trebuchets and ladders, crumble under the rhythmic pounding of iron shot. Rouen, the capital of English Normandy, surrenders in days. Harfleur falls, Honfleur falls. The English garrisons, unpaid and demoralised, watch their world disintegrate. They are fighting a war of romantic heroism against a war of industrial ballistics, and they are losing. Then comes the Battle of Formigny in April 1450. It is the anti-Agincourt, a grim parody of the English glories of the past. An English relief army under Thomas Kyriel lands to save the collapsing duchy. They find a good defensive position near a stream, plant their stakes, and wait. It is the classic English playbook. Provoke the French into a foolish charge and slaughter them with longbows, but the French do not charge. Instead, Jean Bureau rolls 2 light cannons onto a flank, just out of bowshot. He lights the fuse. The guns roar. The balls plough through the English ranks, smashing archers and men-at-arms alike. It is not a massacre, but it is an intolerable provocation. The English cannot stand there and be shelled. They are forced to leave their prepared positions and charge the guns. They capture them, but in doing so, their formation is broken. The French heavy cavalry, waiting for this exact moment, sweeps in. The archers, caught in the open without their stakes, are cut down. The invincible longbowman dies, not by a sword, but because he brought a bow to a gunfight. Formigny is the psychological breaking point. The English realise that the rules of the game have been rewritten. A peasant with a handgun or a bombardier with a match can now kill the greatest archer in England without breaking a sweat. The meritocracy of the bow is replaced by the democracy of gunpowder. The English are swept out of Normandy. The god dams drift back across the Channel, leaving behind their lands, their French wives, and their dreams of empire. But the Bureau brothers are not done. The war shifts south to Gascony, the ancient English possession that has been loyal to the crown for 3 centuries. In 1453, the final act plays out at Castillon. It is the last battle of the 100 Years' War, and it is a masterpiece of the new mercenary warfare. The English commander is the legendary John Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury, Old Talbot, now over 80 years old, a relic of the age of chivalry. He is brave, aggressive, and utterly doomed. He marches to relieve the siege of Castillon. He hears a report that the French are fleeing. It is a trap, or perhaps just bad intelligence. But Talbot, eager for glory, charges his men forward. He finds the French army not in a chaotic retreat, but encamped behind a massive, zigzagging earthwork designed by Jean Bureau. It is a killbox. The French have 300 guns aimed at the approach. Talbot, driven by the ghosts of the past, orders a frontal assault. It is suicide. As the English shout Talbot, St. George, and rush the earthworks, the sky turns white. The French guns open fire with grapeshot, canvas bags filled with scrap metal and nails. It is a shredding machine. The chronicles say the English fell like grass before the scythe. Talbot himself, the terror of the French for 40 years, has his horse killed by a cannonball. As he lies trapped under the beast, a French archer, a simple mercenary, walks up and finishes him with a battle axe. There is no duel, no final words of honour, just the thud of iron and the end of an era. The smoke clears over Castillon on July 17th, 1453. The English army is annihilated. There will be no more invasions. The war is effectively over, but something else has died in the smoke. The Free Company. The Bureau brothers have proven that war is now too expensive for private enterprise. You cannot build a cannon in a bandit camp. You cannot make gunpowder in a forest hideout. You need a state. You need a treasury. You need a king. The industrialization of war has squeezed the independent contractor out of the market. The roots of the 14th century, those wandering states of violence, are gone, replaced by the Royal Artillery. The mercenaries who survive Castillon look at the future and see a grim reality. The days of looting a province and living like a king are over. The King of France is now the only employer in town, and he pays in steady small wages, not in the lottery of ransoms. The romance is dead. The knight is dead. The longbow is dead. What remains is the state, a leviathan armed with fire, demanding a monopoly on violence. The mercenary must now become something else, a soldier of the line. The wild, chaotic, terrible freedom of the 100 Years' War is being suffocated by the grey smoke of the future. The guns cool in the evening air, ticking as the metal contracts, counting down the seconds to the modern world. The guns of Castillon have cooled, and the smoke has drifted away to reveal a silence that France has not known for 5 generations. It is 1453, and the 100 Years' War is technically over, but for the people of the countryside, the silence is terrifying. They know what happens when wars end. They remember the Treaty of Bretigny in 1360, when peace merely unleashed the free companies to devour the land. They brace themselves for the écorcheurs, the flayers, the skinners of society who strip travellers of their shirts and peasants of their hope. These are the last degenerate descendants of the great mercenary bands, men who have known nothing but the raid and the ransom. They are waiting for the king to disband the armies so they can begin their private harvest of the kingdom. But this time, something different happens. The king does not disband them, he absorbs them. We are witnessing the birth of the modern state, a creature born from the ashes of the mercenary age. King Charles VII, the man who was once ridiculed as the King of Bourges, has become Charles the Victorious, and he has done so by learning the hardest lesson of the century. If you rent your army, you rent your sovereignty. He realizes that the only way to kill the free company is to outbid it forever. He issues the Ordonnance of 1445, a piece of legislation that is more revolutionary than any canon. It creates the Compagnie d'Ordonnance du Roi, the first standing army in Western Europe since Rome fell. Imagine the scene at a muster in the late 1450s. It is not the chaotic gathering of feudal levies we saw at the start of our journey, nor the predatory assembly of a free company. It is boringly, beautifully bureaucratic. The king's inspectors are there with their ledgers. They are organising the army into 15 companies, each of 100 lances. But a lance is no longer just a weapon. It is a tactical unit of 6 men, a heavy man-at-arms, a squire, 3 archers, and a page. These men are not promised loot. They are promised a salary. They are paid every month in good coin, raised from a permanent tax called the tile. The people of France are groaning under the tax, yes, but they pay it willingly, for it is the price of sleeping at night without fear of the flayers. The protection racket of the early mercenaries has been nationalised. The king is now the only one allowed to extort the peasantry, and in return he guarantees that no one else will. The captains of the old free companies face a stark choice. Men like La Hire, had he lived, or Poton de Xaintrailles must decide, accept a commission in the king's army and become an officer, or refuse and become an outlaw. Most choose the commission. The wild wolves of the chevauchée are put on a leash. They are given uniforms, liveries of red, white and green. They are garrisoned in specific towns, not to loot them, but to police them. The transition is profound. A man who might have burned a village in 1350 for refusing to pay tribute is now, in 1460, the man hanging a bandit for stealing a chicken. The poacher has become the gamekeeper. The structure of this new army kills the old mercenary culture. In the free companies, loyalty was to the captain. If the captain left, the men followed. In the ordonnance companies, the captain is appointed by the king. The men are paid by the king's treasurer, not the captain's purse. The chain of command bypasses the charismatic warlord and anchors directly to the crown. The private enterprise of war is bankrupt. The market has been regulated out of existence. Of course, the mercenary does not disappear entirely. The king still hires specialists, Swiss pikemen, German gunners, Scottish guards. But they are employees of the state, not independent contractors. They do not roam the countryside when the war is over. They go where they are told. The contract is now a career. We see the rise of military academies, of drill manuals, of the boring, repetitive discipline that characterizes modern armies. The romance of the errant knight seeking fortune and glory is replaced by the reality of the professional soldier seeking a pension and a promotion. The legacy of the 100 Years' War, then, is not just a shift in borders, but a fundamental shift in the human experience of violence. The mercenaries, in their greed and their brutality, forced the state to evolve. They made war so expensive, so destructive, and so unmanageable that kings had to create absolute monarchies just to survive them. The hired till became the architects of their own obsolescence. They taught Europe that a government without a monopoly on force is just a landlord with a fancy title. As we look back over the century, from the first contracts of Edward III to the roaring guns of Castillon, we see a river of blood that watered the roots of the modern world. The English longbowmen who stood at Crécy, the routiers who burned the Languedoc, the Italians who followed Hawkwood, and the gunners who served the Bureau brothers, they were all grinding the jagged edges of feudalism into the smooth machinery of the nation-state. They were the midwives of a new age, delivering it with forceps of steel and fire. The free company is gone, buried under the weight of the king's law, but its ghost lingers in every standing army, every defence contract, and every tax bill that pays for the common defence. The soldier of fortune has become the soldier of the line. The sun sets on a France that is finally, exhaustedly, at peace. The fields of Patay and Poitiers are silent now, the grass growing tall over the bones of archers and dukes alike. The castles that were once nests of brigands are slowly turning into the chateaux of the Renaissance, places of pleasure rather than defence. The armour is hung up in great halls, polishing slowly into rust, becoming decoration rather than survival gear. The war that consumed 5 generations is over. The long dark night of the mercenary has ended, and a cold grey dawn of royal order has broken. The fire has burned down to embers, casting long soft shadows across the room. The clash of steel and the roar of the bombard have faded into the quiet rhythm of your own breathing. We have walked a long road together through the mud of Agincourt, the heat of Spain, and the golden hills of Italy. We've seen kings rise and fall, and watched as the wild, chaotic world of the sword was tamed by the pen and the gun. History is a heavy book, but now it is time to close it. Let the dates and the names drift away like smoke. They are safe in the past. They cannot touch you here. The mercenaries have all gone home. The contracts are fulfilled. The night is yours now, unburdened by the weight of centuries. Let the silence wrap around you, a soft, warm blanket against the dark. The world is still. The story is done. Sweet dreams.